There's nothing scarier than being a kid and seeing something that you just can't explain. Well, tonight I've got two guys that, when they were about 10 or 11 years old, had an encounter with Bigfoot that absolutely shook them up. First up on the show, I've got Donald. And Donald woke up one night next to his brother, and a Bigfoot creature was standing over him. And it really, really shook him up. We're going to get into that. But after that, we're going to talk to Chris. And Chris walked outside of his grandma's property one night and really close to his family in my home state of Arkansas. And he was less than 5 feet away from the Bigfoot creature. And he gets into all that. And these things have had massive impacts on these two gentlemen. And we're going to dive into every detail. But before we do, I just want to say thanks for being here with me tonight. I appreciate all the support. If you've got an encounter you would like to send me, you can send it to me by email at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. But let's jump right into the stories. Donald, welcome to the show.
Listen, I really appreciate you having me here, man. Because this does mean a lot to me, and I'm sure it means a lot to other people as well. Just being able to come somewhere where they can feel comfortable and tell their story. To give you an idea of where we were in our apartment. And again, this is in Bristol, Tennessee, but if you left out of our apartment and just went straight on out the road, it would take you to the lake, and on into the mountain of the Cherokee National Forest. So I'm very close to that. And I grew up out there. But at the time we were living in that apartment, and our cousin had lived behind us in a house. So me and my brother were laying in our mom's bedroom floor. And, we had this nice cool pallet and was pretending like we were camping, And after we had fell asleep, I got up at some point and went into the kitchen, climbed on a chair, and got me a glass of water. Now, while I stood there on my knees on that chair, drinking my water, I would just look out the back window and just to look. And next thing I know, coming from my right to my left across the yard that way, I seen this big, black, what at that age I thought was a man. I'm like, that is just a big man. I really didn't know who Bigfoot was when I was at that age. When I drank the glass of water and I went back into the bedroom and laid down beside my brother. Now, he's always been a protector. He's always been that guy that wants to protect me. While laying out next to him under the blankets with him, and I've been diving deep into this Bigfoot thing for a while now, and just kind of doing my quiet own thing. So a lot of people don't know, but I've came to find out that, Bigfoot can make some pretty strange noises sometimes. And it just blew my mind to hear this. And maybe it wasn't him making this noise, but the thing that caught my attention when I was laying there was I heard pretty much the sound of like a loud mouse, just a squeaking noise. And that's what caught my attention to have me look. Now, when I turned and looked towards the doorway, all I could see was a giant black figure standing in front of the doorway. It was way too big for the doorway, so I couldn't see everything, but I could certainly see from the torso down. And it was definitely hairy. It was like of course, it was dark in the apartment, so I don't want to say it was black. I do want to say that there was some brown, but it was very, like it, if the wind was blowing, like it might wave a little bit, kind of is what it looked like. And I remember me tapping on my brother, trying to wake him up. And finally, he woke up and he's laying beside me and he's looking at this. He immediately started trying to get me to go into the blankets to calm me down. He didn't want me to scream because he thought that might make it worse. But I gotta be honest with you. The whole vibe that I got from this was that this thing was just extremely curious. Like it never made any um, hateful or uh, scary kind of movements towards me. I remember it bending down to look in the doorway at us, and there was no light in our room, but I could see yellow eyes clear as day. And it didn't step any farther past the door. Like it did not come all the way over there to us, but we still was within, 5 to 10 foot from this thing. I just remember my brother sitting there, telling me how tough I am and that it's probably nothing. It's probably mom's friend trying to scare us, just trying to get me to calm down. And the next thing I know, we ended up falling asleep. It didn't mess with us. It didn't get aggravated with us for any reason, but we got the strong vibe that it was very curious. And my brother even goes as far as to saying he thought it was there to help protect us because, we we was left at home quite a bit alone as kids. So he thinks that that could be a thing. And the next morning, we did get up and go look around the apartment to see if like anything was broken or anything like that. And I do remember that the back door was open, which wasn't like a shocker to me because they're never locked. But that just I'm so intrigued. I want to learn so much more. Like they're so intelligent. They know how to open our doors. And if he wasn't there to hurt me and he was just curious, like I wonder what would have happened if I would have got up as a child, not an adult, but if I would have got up as a child and just maybe offered my hand. I know it sounds crazy, but it seemed like he wasn't trying to hurt us. It seems like he was just confused.
Who knows what would have happened if you'd have gotten up as a child? I know a lot of the times they talk about in, with a lot of Native American people, they talk about them stealing their children, stealing the kids, things like that. So who knows? But I know that you were really young when this happened, and it's hard to wrap your mind around something like that. But how did that affect you as a young kid?
As a young kid, I didn't know about Bigfoot. So what ended up happening, I was just constantly confused, and I just wanted to know more and more and more and more. And that's how it's been my whole life. So many of these people that have been on your show that have these testimonies that come from their heart and they're real, you know, I I want to learn, man. It's just intrigued me because I didn't have a terrifying experience. I think if I would have had a terrifying experience, I'd be telling you something completely different.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, man. It does. Good or bad, these things leave a mark on you. These kind of encounters like that, and it's a lot of strange stuff. And who knows what that thing was doing? I think that they're extremely curious, highly intelligent, and they definitely probably was just trying to figure out what was going on with you guys. Had you seen anything else on the property prior to that, or after that?
Not on that property. So when I went to live on top of the mountain, now there was definitely some supernatural things that would go on out there. Miles back in the mountains where there's no, you got to hike a trail, there's no road. I mean, you would hear what would sound like a female screaming to the top of her lungs. And there's nobody sane enough to go out there at that hour at night. And I remember this one time I walked out of my grandmother's yard. She's got this tiny hill. I walked down that hill, and she let her granddaughter put a trailer up on this part of her property. As I'm walking towards the trailer, um, the deck is kind of right here. And beside the deck, and this was on Halloween, I'm walking towards the trailer, and all of a sudden, just this bright, like the sun, bright light flashed, poof, and went away. Right? What's crazy about that to me is that there was nobody around to shine a light. There were no breakers broken. There were no malfunctions in anything that could have caused like a bright light explosion or anything like that. And that's just something that I can't ever get off of my mind. That light came out of nowhere.
Yeah, that's pretty strange, man. I had a guy, Daryl Adams, that came on the show a few months back. He's been on the show twice actually, but he had a property in Oregon. They called the property Owl Moon Labs, and after they had this Bigfoot encounter, a lot of weird, strange stuff started happening. And he said one night him and his wife were in bed. Same kind of thing you described, just this bright light out of nowhere came, just boom, really bright, and it just went away as fast as it came. And all these strange things started to happen after they had this encounter with these creatures that were on the property. So there's a lot of weird stuff tied to this stuff, man. And who knows, man, there's so many questions with all this. But when you talk to your brother about that, what does he remember about the encounter?
So what he remembers about the encounter is me waking him up, him looking in the door, and pretty much immediately trying to dismiss it as something else. It's not what it appears to be. It's the way he wanted to look at it. He wanted to just push it away. That's not what that is. None of that. But clear, like deep down, he knew that wasn't something we have ever seen in our life. But, you know, quickly after that, he just went to focusing on me because I was pretty freaked out because I did see the thing outside, and it just made me wonder. Like he was at my cousin's house behind there, walking, and all I did was went and got a drink of water, and I guess he seen me, which is like, dang, how did he see me?
It's really weird, man. I think that they're extremely curious. And I think that maybe some of the missing 411 people are related to these creatures, not all of them, but some of them. And with having an encounter like you did and having, this close to this creature, what do you think kept you safe that night, man? What do you think kept this thing from grabbing you guys and taking off with you?
Being that young, obviously wasn't saved. I knew about God. And I truly think that God gives us the free will to accept that or not. And at that age, as a child, I'm not that much aware of how everything works. I just know that God is my savior, and I should love him because I'm just in these Awanas clubs and these little small child church things. It don't go deep into that, you know. But I truly believe that as a young child, I didn't just go with the motions or go to church because I was made to. I actually believed in everything that I was reading there or being told. And I think that because I had a pure heart to learn um, about how I could get my salvation and go to heaven, I think that had a lot to do with it.
Makes a lot of sense to me, man. I think they definitely know the name of Jesus. I've talked to so many people who had these encounters that, they'll call on the name of Jesus, and these things will leave. They'll stop dead in their tracks. They'll walk away. And I think for sure, man, God had he protected you that night, kept you safe. So I think you're spot on with that, man. And that makes a whole lot of sense. Going back to the encounter, when you first saw this thing out the window, and I know you said it was just, you thought it was this big person, but did you see any details through the window, or was it mostly just like a figure that you saw?
Of course, I didn't know the Patty Gilman film. Never seen it before. I was too young. I can tell you now that after watching that film, that this thing absolutely walked just like that. There was no difference. It walked just like that. And that is something that I definitely remember. Of course, when it was in the apartment, I could get a lot better visual of it. It was just hard because the way the doorway was, he had to, crouch down to look through there. And so I'm trying to just take in what I can. As a child, I went through the Marine Corps, and I was infantry, which meant like I had to really be good at attention to detail and things like that. But as a child, I hadn't been through none of that cool training, and so I didn't really know that I need to be trying to pay attention to some of these smaller things. I know the eyes were yellow because it stared straight at me, and I stared straight at it. What I remember about the nose is like it had big holes. Does that make sense? Like big nostril holes. I can't exactly remember how the shape of the nose was, but it didn't look like mine or yours. You know what I mean? It was dark in our room, so I don't remember seeing like any kind of, I guess you would call them like battle scars or anything like that on its face. Honestly, it looked like it had a shower. Like it wasn't what I would have expected it to be, all matted up and like just looking like it hadn't been cleaned in a while. But this thing didn't look like that. And I could be wrong because it was dark, but everything just kind of seemed to flow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I interviewed a lady last week, and she was telling me about her encounter where this thing looked like it had been groomed. Like it was just, the hair was just combed out and everything looked really, pristine. And it's not what you think of, when you think about seeing these creatures. And it's a lot of strangeness, man. I don't know what you do with some of this stuff. And, this kind of leads me up to this question. And also, man, thanks for your service. I appreciate what you did for our country. I have a lot of respect for you guys. So I appreciate your service. But, it's kind of the $1 million question. And I always like to hear everybody's thoughts on this. But what do you think these things are?
I've heard stories where there have been people that claim they have killed them, but we never see any evidence. Okay. I would love to believe that they are just blood and, flesh and all that. Something tells me that it's a little more complicated than that because of how well they can move, how well they seem to know us. It can't just be another flesh and blood bipedal animal like a primate, because they are just far too intelligent. They know us.
There's got to be more to these things than just flesh and blood, in my opinion. And I go back to, Genesis chapter 6. I look at the Nephilim, I look at things like that. And, sometimes I think, though, that some of these creatures, when they're flesh and blood, they're flesh and blood. And when they're not, they're not. I don't know what else to do with that. But it's always interesting to hear everybody's thoughts and opinions. And I love that you shared that with my audience. And thanks for being brave enough to come forward to share that encounter and just to share that with everybody. What an incredible encounter. I'm glad you're here to tell it. So I appreciate that, man. We'll get back to the show in just a second, but I just wanted to say thank you so much for liking and watching this video. Would you guys consider being a member? I got all kinds of cool things coming down the pipeline. Lots of perks if you join and become members of this tribe. We're building a really cool community. So be a part of that, be a member. Let's just jump right back into the story. Thanks, guys. Next up on the show is Chris. I'm excited to have him on here. He's from my home state. So let's get right into the story. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir.
Man, I'm really excited to have you here. So if you would take us back to when you were just about 10 years old on your grandma's property there, close to Camden, Arkansas, and just walk us through the encounter.
Okay, so my grandma's bar is it's not quite in Camden. It's a little bit away from Camden, at an area called Chester. So I was about 10, anywhere 10 to 12 years old. I'm about 31 now, so that's it's been a while. Well, I most of the time, every weekend or so, my grandma would have the bar active. I'd pop in, grab me a soda, pop back out. Well, one night I'm getting my soda. My grandma, we and her always had a really strong relationship, so she was playing with me. She's like, all right, you get out of here. I don't want you being in here. You're not supposed to be in here. Get your soda and leave." So she chases me out the front door. I'm laughing, and I got a bit of a jog on me. And when I finally slow down, I'm still got a giggle, and I stop and I look. Look dead ahead, straight ahead at me, and my grandmother's parking lot where everybody would park to come into the bar. It's not very big. I say about 6 or 7 cars, 2 rows apiece. I'm at the tail end of it, right directly underneath the street light, and right as the parking lot ends, the small little clearing and field begins, and there's a group of saplings right there that just completely block out the street light going into that little field clearing and into a small little gravel roundabout that takes to a bunch of other houses, or a few other houses around that area. And I see something moving. Now my first instinct, I think, oh, this is another bar patron, this is another, this is just somebody going to their car. Well, in just a split second, I'm like, no, everybody's inside already, because I've seen everybody. I'm familiar with most people that frequent my grandma's bar. Okay, I don't see any car lights on. That they're not coming towards the bar. They're going to my right, which is going to the rest of the roundabout. And then I was like, okay, well, that's weird. But they're not stepping into the light at all. And then, I'm a small guy. Like I said, I'm about 5'6", 5'7" on a good day. So I already know I'm small now. I was about 10 or 11, 12, so I'm smaller. And I don't know if it was that or what, but then I noticed the size. And it was massive. I mean, huge. From what I remember, I could see an arm, but not the whole arm. And I couldn't see the legs either, because they were obscured by, the foliage that was underneath some of the saplings that was walking past. But I clearly saw from the elbow to the shoulder, I saw its whole bicep. And they were a good bit above where these branches and these saplings were. Well, I had my grandfather the next morning check the height of where these branches started, and they started at about 7 or 8 feet. So I saw this thing's whole bicep above the beginning of these branches. And it keeps going, and it clearly is angling to stay in the dark. And then, I notice how big it is, and immediately I'm scared. I don't know who this is. Is probably not a person. It's too big. And I had known what Bigfoot was from before. I had seen Legend of Boggy Creek, a year or two, few years before this. But I'm also, I'm from Arkansas, and I'm familiar with most of the people that should be here. There's just a lot of things added up. I'm like, I know what that is. I'm pretty sure I know what that is, and I've never been that scared before in my life. I've never ran that fast in my life. I sprinted back to my grandmother's house as fast as I could go. And I, you know, the worst part was the stairs. I knew as I'm running back to the house, I knew I was gonna have to hit the stairs to get back into the trailer, because we lived. The bar is here. Our trailer was right here. So I knew I was going to have to run in between the bar and to get to our stairs, and then I'd have to do an almost like a U-turn to get onto the stairs. And at the top of the stairs, I'd be looking dead back the way I was running. So I was like, I'm dead. I'm gone. I'm tiny. This thing's got me. I'm done for. Well, I get to the top of the stairs, and I'm expecting something to just have me at any point. and I look back when I get to the top of the stairs, and I have just a split second where I'm looking, I don't see any. And I was so scared. I didn't even feel relief that nothing was chasing me. I was like, no, it's just gonna come around the trailer. It's just not gonna cut through the light. It's gonna come around the trailer, and I need to get in this house. And that all happened in like a split second. I get in, I lock every door. I'm staying away from the windows. I'm in like the dead center of the trailer until my grandmother came in at like 2 a.m. I mean, honestly, nothing before or since has come close to how scared I was.
Man, as a kid seeing something like that, that's definitely really scary, especially if you had an idea what Bigfoot was and you kind of knew what that thing could be. I know there's some questions I want to ask you about your encounter, but before I do that, I want to ask you, man, as a young kid and being that young, how did that encounter impact your life?
Honestly, it hit me really hard. In Arkansas, there's woods everywhere. You can't throw a rock without hitting a tree. So, you got to imagine for a good few years, I had a lot going on at that point in time in my life. So it wasn't, forefront of my mind or anything. It was back here. But between school, hanging out with friends, we'd go out in the woods to hang out. And man, I tell you, I was always looking over my shoulder. I couldn't, I refused to be in the woods at night. Like I mean, there were several times I just missed out on hanging out with my buddies because I just would not be in the woods at night. They'd be like, "Hey man, you want to go camping?" No, I'm good. I got stuff I gotta do. I'm serious, man. Like it's funny now looking back on it, but like I refused to be in a lot of the woods in Arkansas after that. So it hit me kind of hard, man.
It's a scary thing, man, to see something like that. And then, for everybody who doesn't know about Arkansas, man, it's got some super thick woods. I mean, it is, you could be standing right next to you sometimes and you wouldn't even know it because the woods are so thick. But back to your encounter, when you saw this thing, and I know there was a lot happening and you were really scared, but did you smell anything or did you hear a growl or anything like that?
No, see, that's the part that always stuck with me about this story and why I tell it every chance I get. My friend, as I made friends throughout the years, I tell this story multiple times, and that's one of the things that always just got to me about the story was I never heard a sound. Now, the reason why that's a big deal is because he started when I first, because he also moved incredibly fast. There's like a few things about it that really got me. He was not running. I don't even think he acknowledged I was there. And I'm saying he just as like a general. I don't know if it was a he or she, but like this thing, I never saw it turn to acknowledge me. Because I saw its bicep. That's how I know it didn't like turn its body to see me. I clearly saw the side of an arm. It made no noise. It was on gravel. Like the first part of the darkness that I when I first caught a glimpse of it was on gravel, then it moved into grass and dirt. And no noise whatsoever. Now, I could not do that. Barefooted on this gravel, I don't care. Nothing moves quiet on. I don't know. It made no noise. I smelled nothing either. That was another thing. Is this thing was practically invisible, and I was about 5 feet away from it too. That's the thing that like I said, there's a bunch of stuff that's really gets to me about my encounter. Is I was about 5 feet away from it because I was right about on the edge of the light where the street lights stopped, where that darkness, where like the night began. And I think that's the only reason I even caught sight of him is because I was close enough that I could make out things in the field and at night, and I managed to see him. That's the I'm that's the only reason I even think I saw him is because I got that close. And I know I'm not like the biggest guy. I'm sorry, my kid. Like I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but this thing was massive. I mean, this like the size of it is just I he was casually strolling past like trucks, and you know us in Arkansas, man. These trucks were huge. These have mud and tires on them. You know the kind of people I'm talking about. So like this, and the way he just walked through everything didn't disturb anything. The only thing he moved, and the only reason I know it wasn't a shadow, I don't know it was a physical object, is because the trees moved with him against the wind. Like that's the thing. Like I know this wasn't a shadow cooked up by a hyperactive imagination, because yeah, I admit I have a hyperactive imagination. I overthink stuff. But the wind, especially on a lake, I saw it going one way. The trees that he was moving through were going the other way. I know he was there. He was a physical thing, and I saw the trees moving with him.
I don't think until you have an encounter, you really can grasp how big these things are and the mass that they carry. And it's weird how they can go from, being this big to not making a sound, right? Like they'll turn it on and off. There's a lot of people who have these encounters where they'll follow footprints off into the field and they just stop. They're just gone. Like they just, what is that? How does that work? And speaking of all that, I would love to know your opinion on that, man. What do you think these things are?
Man, it's funny because I can actually track a lot of my relationship with God by how deep I got into cryptids as I got older. Because like I said, I'm about 30. I'm 31 now, and I don't think that I do not think they are just a flesh and blood creature, because I think flesh and blood is not a hallmark of a natural creature. I think, you know, oh god, I'm gonna sound like a lunatic. Okay, the way I look at it is, if angels ate food and they drank, then they were physical beings, which is flesh and blood. So to say it's a flesh and blood creature is like, well, I mean, yeah, obviously it interacts with the world, it's physical. But to say that that means it's also not supernatural is also like, those two things don't have to be exclusive of each other. So there's got to be a supernatural element to it, man. Nothing else has ever made me that scared. I mean, that's just a different kind of fear.
No, it is. It's a different kind of fear, and I can relate to that with my encounter, man. It was a palpable fear. I knew this thing was not happy I was there. Like I felt it, in a different kind of fear. In law enforcement, trust me, I felt fear. That was a different type of fear, so I can relate with that. And man, you don't sound crazy at all. I look at everything through a biblical lens, and if you look at the way angels interact in the scripture, I mean, it just makes sense that there's got to be more to this than just flesh and blood. Maybe there's some of these creatures that are just that, but maybe there's some that are more or are mixed. But it's really interesting to me, and I love to hear everybody's thoughts. But man, if you had the opportunity to see this thing again or another creature, would you want to?
Absolutely not. I've got I've got kids of my own now, and the thought of my son having that encounter, that like, no, absolutely not. I don't want to see one of these things ever again, because I'm with my family a lot most of the time. I love being around my kids. Being a dad's great. So if I saw one again, it would have to be without my kids. And no, no, man, I'm good. I've seen it. I've seen about as much of them as I care to. I'm fine.
That's a good answer, man. I totally can understand that. These things are life changing. They change your perspective on the world, and especially as a father, man, you look at that and you don't want your kids to be anywhere near that or experience what you did. So I totally get that. Going back to your encounter again after that sighting, did you see anything else after that, or was that the only sighting?
So after I came down from the fear, which was the next morning, I actually tried to tell my grandma, but I was so scared. I was like, something stopped me, because I love my grandma to death. Me and my grandmother have always been really close. She raised me, so the fact that I wasn't able to tell her when it happened, that kind of said everything I needed to feel about it when it came to talking about it with other people. So I was like, okay, I couldn't tell my grandmother about it, but I still went out the next morning. I was like, it's daylight. I'm gonna go look. I saw nothing. The only thing that let me know that it wasn't a dream and it wasn't like something I made up was, if you went to that area the next morning, you could clearly see where a lot of the like brush had been stepped down, and there was now a walking trail, like an area you could get through, because those saplings were real bunched together, because they're just, I don't know who planted them, but they planted them way too close together. And normally it's just something you like climb on. They're real young saplings at that point in time. But that next morning, there was a clear path. You could get right through that little bundle of saplings now, and that was the only thing that let me know that was real. So I never saw anything after it again. That whole area, nobody's, as far as I'm aware, nobody's ever come forward and said, "Hey, out in this area, we've seen something while we've been fishing." Nope, nothing. It's just me. My grandma's never said anything about it. My grandfather, while he was still alive, never said anything about it, which that didn't surprise me. You know how the older men are.
They keep things close to the vest, so I totally understand that. And they might have seen it, just never said anything. But I know sometimes these things migrate through areas, and that area is not that far from Falk, Arkansas, really. And for it's not that big of a stretch for it to maybe be, you know, uh, around that area. And so maybe it's just migrating through, and you just happen to be out there at the right time, man. But I'm glad that you are here to share it, and that could have went a totally different direction. I'm really glad that you are, and man, thanks for coming forward and sharing your encounter.
Hey, thank you. I know it's not a real like exciting or lengthy encounter, but I'm glad that I got to tell it properly this time.
Guys, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you enjoyed these episodes as much as I did. And hearing these stories, I'm very fortunate that people trust me enough to send me their encounters, and I don't take any of it for granted. A lot of times, like I say, I hear these things for the first time with you guys. So if you've got an encounter that you would like to share, I would love to hear it. Please email me at mysteriesunknownpodcast@gmail.com. To come forward on a platform like this and to share something so personal, it's not easy, but it definitely helps these people. And that's part of the reasons I started this channel, is to just give people a safe platform to share these encounters. And thanks for being a big part of that, because we couldn't do it without you. I appreciate all the support. Thanks for hanging out with us tonight. I'm going to say it. Stay prayed up, guys. We'll see you in the next episode.